All right, we'll get more details, and we'll have them for you tomorrow night as it relates to Peter Strzok, that behind closed-door meeting. We're expecting him. He's going to have to testify publicly. Tomorrow, it's the FBI Director Wray and Rod Rosenstein, and it'll be on TV. And we'll have the latest in the battle. The left demonizes all things conservative, especially the president's Supreme Court pick, whoever it ends up being. Let not your heart be troubled. There's Laura. Made it just on time.
Hannity, why don't you and I go and sit in, at the house, and like, if we could sneak in a little, like some Jiffy Pop. Do they still make that? Some Jiffy Pop popcorn.
Oh, you mean watch the hearings tomorrow?
Yeah, wouldn't that be fun?
I haven't heard Jiffy Pop, Ingraham, in like ages, but
what can I say?
There's something called the microwave. There's been a new invention.
Jiffy Pop tastes better than the microwave.
Jiffy Pop is awesome. You'd watch the thing, put it on the stove, you shake it up,
rich.
and then all of a sudden the big ball. It was great.
We couldn't afford that. We had to get the off-brand kind.
Jiffy Pop popcorn, sponsoring the Laura Ingraham and Hannity programs on the Fox News Channel.
All right. Well, we're really dating ourselves. Sean Hannity,
we really are. Have a great
show. All right. Good evening from Washington. I'm Laura Ingraham. This is the Ingraham Angle. Oh, my God. I keep saying this, but this was an unbelievable day, an earthquake at the Supreme Court that could change the direction of the nation. The retirement of Supreme Court Justice Anthony M. Kennedy, the court's key swing vote, will have enormous consequences. It gives President Trump the opportunity to reshape the court for decades. We're also going to look at how this dramatically affects the midterm election prospects. But first, we begin with Democrats racing to the left. That's the focus of tonight's Angle. The Democratic Party experienced a seismic shock last night when, in the New York City outer boroughs, a 28-year-old political novice primaried and defeated a member of the Democratic leadership. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez ended the 20-year run of Congressman Joe Crowley, who many thought would succeed Pelosi as the Democratic leader. So he raised $3 million in the race. Ocasio-Cortez about $300,000. By now, you may have heard some of the bullet points here. She's a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. Who isn't? She supports publicly funded trade schools and universities. Well, she worked for Ted Kennedy and Bernie Sanders. She's called for the abolishment of Immigration Customs Enforcement, otherwise known as ICE. Now, Ocasio-Cortez even went down to the border a few days ago to protest the Trump immigration policies.
Free the children! Free the children! Free the children! Free the children! Free the...
In interviews today, the I word came up.
I would support impeachment. I think that, we have the grounds to do it.
On what ground should the president be impeached?
Well, I think that there are serious grounds in violations of the emoluments clause from day one.
Ooh, the emoluments clause. Did we go to Wikipedia for that? Well, look, come on. That's the typical left-wing MoveOn.org blather. But here's what you need to know. Ocasio-Cortez is a disruptor from the far left wing of the Democratic Party. I mean, she's attractive, she went all in, and you got to give her credit for what she did. And this is what happens when a political establishment fails to deliver results and refuses to listen to its people, its base, election after election. Now, remember when the Democratic elite, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, DNC head, and Hillary Clinton conspired to keep Bernie Sanders from winning the nomination?
And all you have to do is take a look at WikiLeaks and just see what they said about Bernie Sanders and see what Deborah Wasserman Schultz had in mind. Because Bernie Sanders, between superdelegates and Deborah Wasserman Schultz, he never had a chance.
Oh, it was so smart for Trump to bring that up. Now, let's not forget, all the energy during 2016, it was with Sanders. He filled more stadiums, he was more passionate, was always about the working class, and he excited more young people than Hillary Clinton ever could. But though he stirred up the Democratic base, the establishment, they put him down. Well, you can only do that for so long until your voters rebel, which is what they did against Crowley last night.
I think what it should tell the American people is that when you have candidates like Alexandria who have the guts to talk about the real issues impacting people's lives. She campaigned on health care as a right, not a privilege. They'll win in New York City. They won in Maryland. We're seeing this happening all across the country.
Okay, this upset in New York, last night, it was the Liberal Party faithful acting out against the Democratic leadership for their ineffectiveness. It's also a not-so-quiet admission, let's face it, that Trump, he's winning on most every front, and he's been able to steamroll the Democrats on key issues. The Republican Party, let's not forget, though, they experienced its own wake-up call back in 2014. Now, Eric Cantor, remember, he was ousted by that barely known econ professor named Dave Bratt. And then Speaker John Boehner was ushered into retirement not long thereafter. Well, now the bell is tolling for Nancy Pelosi, former Speaker for the Democrats, who was questioned about last night's stunning upset.
The Democratic Party is increasingly younger, more female, more diverse, more progressive. Should the Democratic House leadership look that way?
Well, I'm female, I'm progressive. 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Republicans say that one of the things this defeat shows is that democratic socialism is ascendant in your party. Are they right about that?
No, they're not. It's ascendant in that district, perhaps.
Other Democratic stalwarts like Maryland gubernatorial candidate, former NAACP chair Ben Jealous, were also pressed today about a possible sea change in the party.
What is your thought on Nancy Pelosi sitting at the helm of your party?
Yeah. Again,
you're not answering our questions, Ben.
Wait, were there 2 beats with that pause? I love that moment. Well, look, unlike Democrats, Republicans were not at a loss for words, but cheered the rout from the left.
It was a stunning development. The energy in the Democratic Party is self-avowed socialist, open borders. We even had a credible potential candidate for president in 2020 suggest we get rid of ICE, the Border Enforcement Agency. I think the Democrats are going hard left.
Well, when I said cheering, that's Mitch McConnell style cheering. Before Republicans, though, start popping the corks, there is a lesson here for them as well. Think about it this way. If Republicans start walking back from the Trump agenda, walking away from it, if they get wobbly or try to diffuse the key policies that Trump won on, that he ran on, danger lies ahead. Republicans today failed to pass another immigration bill, and this after they rejected the Congressman Goodlatte bill that was the most faithful and the best as far as the original Trump agenda went. It's really stupid. Meanwhile, the White House backed off threats to strictly limit Chinese investment in U.S. tech companies. Another disappointment. Although at least Beijing and Wall Street were happy. And despite preliminary data indicating a downturn in arrests at the border this month, the government has reverted, at least for the time being, and they had a district court judge pushing them to do so, they've had to revert to this catch and release policy for illegal immigrants who enter the country with children. So that's frustrating. I'd be very careful. If the voters start believing that you're abandoning the core policies they elected you to advance, they'll remove you from office, no matter how much they initially liked you and no matter how much seniority you have. And when the Democrats stir up young voters, as Ocasio-Cortez did last night, promising them the moon, a host of freebies, how are Republicans going to respond? How do they message the conservative populist agenda that's so smart and so right for younger voters? Disruptors create political opportunities for both sides, but their unexpected victories also carry warnings for those who attempt to conduct business as usual. Trump so far isn't doing that, but on the few issues, we have to keep a very close watch. And that's the angle. I ad-libbed that. Let's get reaction to this leftward turn from my first guest tonight, former Reagan administration member, associate deputy. What was you? You were an associate White House
political director.
Political director. I'm sorry, Jeff. I should have known that off the top of my head. Former Senator Schumer aide Chris Hahn and former Secret Service agent Dan Bongino on NRA TV. All right, let's go right to you. Chris, this was a big, big night for the Democrats last night. The Republicans experienced their own sea change in 2014. But last night, we had this young upstart who's, I mean, if you're a Democrat, she's kind of cool. I mean, she's young, she's hip, she's using social media, she's out there at the border screaming about how ICE is committing human rights violations. But does that win elections nationally?
I don't know about nationally, but, you know, all politics is local, Laura. And she put the focus on local issues and pointed out that her opponent, while he'd been in Congress for 20 years, had really gone native to Washington and wasn't even really living in the district anymore. So she really played on that. She did a very good job. And remember, these are very low turnout elections, and there had never been a June primary in that district. She got her people out, and by the time Crowley noticed that she was nipping at his heels, in fact beating him, it was way too late. He spent a lot of money in the end, but he never had that grassroots, which you need in these June primaries, which are new to New York.
I'm going to get to how she dealt with the Nancy Pelosi leadership question in a second. But Dan Bongino, this was a wild few days for the Democrats because you had Maxine Waters going totally off the rails over the weekend, basically coming close to inciting violence against public officials in public places and so forth. Chuck Schumer saw that as a problem, and he got on the Senate floor and he basically said, whoa, you know, that's un-American to threaten people. Well, listen to some of the blowback he got from some of the most prominent Democratic activists. Let's watch.
Dr. Martin Luther King warned us about people like Chuck Schumer. He said it wasn't the Ku Klux Klan and the white citizen counselors who are the obstacles towards justice. It was the people calling for, quote, civility.
My point is very simple. I demand that people stop requiring Congresswoman Waters to behave in one way while everybody else can do something else. Nancy Pelosi says, let's make America beautiful again. Whose America is she talking about? The fact that Chuck Schumer called what a black woman said un-American is problematic, and this is the reason why Democrats have a hard time reuniting the base.
Dan Bongino, that's the party of Linda Sarsour and Maxine Waters.
Yeah, and Laura, that same commentator there accused Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi of being racist. Now, listen, I am certainly no fan of Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi's politics, but to call them, she insinuated that they were acting out of some malice based on race by calling Maxine Waters' comments non-American. That's utterly absurd. But it points out the cliff you're walking off, Laura, with identity politics. Sooner or later, when you start pitting white versus black, immigrant versus non-immigrant, union versus non-union, you eventually start this cannibalistic tendency, and it's happening now. And if I can just comment on one thing Chris said, too, he's not wrong. All politics is local in a House of Representatives race. But the problem with the Democrat Party, Laura, is local politics aren't national. This is why the Democrat Party, because of Maxine Waters, Ocasio-Cortez, Keith Ellison and his no borders shirt he had on, this is why the Democrats would win a governorship in California and New York and can't win and probably won't win a national election in 2020.
Jeffrey Lord, hold on one second. Jeffrey Lord, there is a poll that came out today. The Hill did a big piece on it. About the way Americans are looking at the tenor of politics today. And check this out. There's an Rasmussen poll about violence against Trump supporters. 59% of Americans are concerned that the anti-Trump protesters are going to resort to violence. And a separate poll said that it's 59% said they were concerned that America would perhaps, experience a second civil war. It's actually 31% said they would experience a second civil war. That's almost a third of Americans. A civil war? A third of Americans think that's how bad it's gotten?
Well, I must say, I think the media has played this up. The media on the left has really gone after President Trump. And needless to say, they did this all through the campaign, and he won. You would think that they would finally get the message here on this. But you can't continually do this and not think that you are going to bear some consequences for this and stir things up. I mean, I'm very concerned when you see this business of going after Trump appointees and Mexican restaurants or putting out wanted posters and all of this. This is not what America is about. This is not what dissent is about. But this is out there, and it's going to tie in at some point, I imagine, to this whole Supreme Court controversy. It's just not good.
Well, you wrote a piece today, and Chris, I want you to respond here. Jeff wrote a piece today about how this is what we see now with the getting in people's faces, the call to harass people. That was bubbling under the surface. You saw some of it with the anti-WTO protests. You saw it with some of the Antifa stuff on college camps. You saw some of it with the Occupy Wall Street movement. But now it's kind of mainstreamed a little bit with someone who's such a folk hero on the left, and that's Maxine Waters. We got Congressional Black Caucus Chair Cedric Richmond. He's not backing off on this at all. In fact, they're criticizing Schumer, et cetera, who tell her to back down.
Well, look, I don't like calls for incivility. I don't like calls to get into people's faces. But we must all admit that President Trump is one of the most incivil presidents we've probably ever had. I mean, he's talked about Second Amendment folks solving a Hillary problem at one point. He gives people vile nicknames. He tells people that he will pay their legal bills if they punch a protester at one of his rallies.
You guys can trot out that same example. That doesn't rise to the level of what a congresswoman who does not back down on what she said. She said later, oh, I'm not resorting to violence, but she said harass, push back on them, and make it uncomfortable for them, drive them out, basically, of public places. Christine, you were shaking your head there.
And the vast majority of Americans and the vast majority of Democrats and Republicans all agree that that has no place in our civil discourse. We should be able to disagree by being agreeable, like we're doing right now.
Right. Well, absolutely. But, Dan, you were shaking your head earlier. I mean, I think the Octavio Cortez, who won last night, I don't think she doesn't seem to be of that mindset, surround people, scream at them. But when you're saying to outlaw ICE, which is now becoming mainstream in the Democrat Party, didn't Cory Booker say that the other day? Kamala Harris, I believe you think basically it should be abolished. Where does that take our country? Now we're not going to be able to enforce our borders. We're not going to be able to deport anybody. We're not going to be able to check the cargo coming into ports, Dan?
It'll lead to the utter destruction of the Democrat Party as you know it right now. The problem now, Laura, is due to a lot of gerrymandering in hyper-partisan districts. These leftists are appealing to this radical leftist secular base that has almost no emergency brake on their behavior at all. These calls for Medicare for all, basically government-run medicine, no borders. Eric Swalwell, congressman from California, writing an op-ed about gun confiscation, how we'll basically send the police to your house if you don't comply. These are radical positions that appeal only to coastal elites.
Okay.
Are you criticizing gerrymandering? But for gerrymandering,
I'm not criticizing gerrymandering, Chris. I'm simply suggesting that the conservative positions, there's nothing radical about people keeping their money, keeping their health care, and keeping their kids' education freedom.
I agree. People should keep their money and their health care, especially the working people in this country. They should keep their health care and they should keep their money.
Speaking of civil, Jeff Lord gets the last word. Jeff.
Look, we've got a problem in this country with let me just say it flat out, fascism and fascists. This is what's going on, and all these people are pointing fingers while they're sending out people in hoods to smash windows, to show up people. I mean, this is not good, and this is not the kind of thing that we should be injecting into our politics now or ever.
All right, guys, thank you so much. Fantastic panel, as always. Now, this is simply one of the biggest days in the Trump presidency, no doubt about it. The president's next Supreme Court nominee could solidify a conservative majority at the court for a generation, maybe a generation or two. Our experts examine the implications in just a moment. With the retirement of Associate Justice Anthony M. Kennedy, the last of Ronald Reagan's appointees to the Supreme Court, President Trump has a spectacular opportunity before him. By nominating a jurist in the tradition of Scalia or Thomas, Trump can ensure that the court majority for another generation, adheres to the proper Article III role that our framers intended.
We don't sit here to make the law, to decide who ought to win. We decide who wins under the law that the people have adopted. And very often, if you're a good judge, you don't really like the result you're reaching. You would rather that the other side had won. It seems to you a foolish law. But in this job, it's garbage in, garbage out. If it's a foolish law, you are bound by oath to produce a foolish result. because it's not your job to decide what is foolish and what isn't. It's the job of the people across the street.
Oh, it makes me sad. I miss him. For too long, of course, the court has, in key cases, strayed from simple statutory and constitutional interpretation in order to advance a liberal social agenda. So what do they do when they do that? Well, they usurp the role of the people's duly elected representatives. Well, this violates the idea of self-government. Self-government with a purpose, as Ronald Reagan called it, where the goal ultimately is to preserve individual liberty. Consider that 45 years ago, amazing, Roe versus Wade, where the court found this mythical right to abortion in the Constitution. The debate about abortion in America today, all those years later, is as intense as ever. It is interesting that in Kennedy's last term on the court, he voted with the majority in the 5-4 cases in all of those 19 instances. And in fact, I can't think of a more reassuring Supreme Court term in recent memory. The court reaffirmed religious liberty rights and the First Amendment right not to be strong-armed by unions to fund causes that offend core values. And the majority upheld the president's statutory authority to control immigration for national security in the travel ban case. Yes, these were all wins for the administration, but more importantly, they were wins for liberty and sovereignty, the Constitution. So this is not the time for the administration to play it safe, to nominate someone who's considered a judicial moderate, or to allow concerns about gender or ethnicity override pure merit and fidelity to the Constitution. So use this opportunity to nominate another stellar figure to the highest court of the land, who respects the limits of the judiciary and is faithful to the Constitution and our Bill of Rights. Let's discuss all of this with my guests, Texas Solicitor General Scott Keller, who clerked for Justice Kennedy, Ed Whalen, president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and president of the American Conservative Union, Matt Schlapp. Okay, guys, this is like such a dream day. I mean, it's sad because it's the last of Ronald Reagan's nominees. Obviously, Justice Kennedy was controversial in some cases, but he was an amazing justice in so many other ways. Scott, you clerked for Justice Kennedy. I think about when Justice Thomas, for whom I clerked, retires. It's a wistful moment. What are your thoughts today?
Yeah, it's the end of an era on the Supreme Court, and it's hard to imagine the Supreme Court without Justice Anthony Kennedy up there. I mean, this was a justice who, when he was nominated and confirmed under President Reagan throughout the years, had seen all sorts of various issues, even up to this current day with the travel ban case. But he voted against all of Obamacare. He obviously had the abortion cases he did, but he also voted to uphold the federal partial birth abortion ban. So Justice Kennedy, while he was controversial at times in some circles, was truly a Reagan Republican.
Ed, of course, we think of Kennedy as, when I went into the court my year, it was right after Webster. So it was, nicknamed Flipper because he flipped his vote. It was a big deal. But nevertheless, that era is over, and we're moving into a new era. Are you confident that those who are being mentioned, and we're going to go through some of them, all of them are in the vein of a Scalia, a Thomas, or a Gorsuch?
Well, I think President Trump has a great list with lots of great candidates on it. Obviously, there's going to be a winnowing process, and I'm confident that we'll end up with someone who is an outstanding
Brett Kavanaugh. Let's go through one with you. Brett Kavanaugh, D.C. Circuit. He clerked for the chief.
No, he clerked for Justice Kennedy.
Kennedy. Yeah. Okay. I always forgot. Okay.
Brett has distinguished himself. Judge Kavanaugh has distinguished himself on the D.C. Circuit. Has written brilliant opinions in a whole broad range of questions. So I think he clearly meets the mark.
Matt Schlapp, we have a lot of other people on the list.
Can I just say I worked with Brett for 4 years. Yeah. Rock solid. Would be a fantastic pick.
Yeah, he's, you already hear from the left. He's another white male guy from the, Georgetown Prep who is you can already hear the left. They check off the box like, oh, you can't nominate, another white man. We need a diverse court. They look at, again, it's the jelly bean approach.
But let me bring up two things. We just need 50 votes. And these Democrats running in these blue seats, in these red states, Laura, they have got to support this Supreme Court nominee or they are in big political trouble.
Speaking of which, Scott, Kamala Harris went into total fear-mongering mode today. Let's watch.
We're looking at a destruction of the Constitution of the United States, as far as I can tell, based on all of the folks that he's been appointing thus far for lifetime appointments. This has got to be one of the, and we all need to understand this, to be one of the most serious fights that we have yet to have had with this president. And we cannot relent.
Scott, they really turned up the volume today on cable. I mean, they were basically saying we're going to do everything except lay our bodies down in front of the Judiciary Committee to just stop basically whoever and anyone on this list. Apparently, we'll go through some of the other candidates are not acceptable.
Well, and we don't even have a nominee yet.
Right, but they're already saying this. This is wild.
But this also goes to the point that this administration has hit home run after home run with their nominations to the federal bench. And I don't think it's going to let up now when they get to appoint a second Supreme Court justice in just 2 years.
Has this ever happened? We've gotten 2 nominees in this year and a half. Has that ever happened? You would know that.
Well, it happened in the first 2 years of President Obama's term,
was it
and also the first 2 years of President Clinton's term.
Okay, I didn't realize it was that fast.
Nixon has them very quickly too. Look, what the left is saying now, have in mind that they tried to filibuster Neil Gorsuch, someone who was widely acclaimed. And in the process, of course, they triggered the abolition of the Supreme Court filibuster. So they have no ammunition left except to make lots of noise.
Let's go to another possible nominee, and then we'll get to Matt on the political aspect. Tom Hardiman, Third Circuit Federal Court of Appeals. He's very well liked. Has a very interesting personal story, got a blue-collar background. He seems like the kind of guy that Trump would like personally, like he would get along. Not that he wouldn't get along with Judge Kavanaugh, sorry. We know these people, so it's hard to not call them by their first name. But, of course, they're all brilliant. But Trump has a feel for people. It's like a kind of a little bit of a personality thing, which I guess can be a little dangerous. But what about Hardiman?
I have very, very high regard for Judge Hardiman. He's less known in D.C. circles than some other candidates, and I think that may have hurt him last time around, but he has an outstanding record as well.
He was close last time around, correct?
He was thought to have been one of the
top
finalists
3
last time around. Yeah.
Matt, I understand from sources that the president is probably going to meet with at least 4 people this time around. It's winnowed down already. There's a very long list, but it's not really that long. But the Democrats have already turned up the volume so hot on this. They're going to use it to do what I think this Octavia Cortez did last night, smartly kind of gin up their base. Abortion is going to be outlawed in the United States. It's going to be horrible. This was a number of media figures today speaking about this. Let's watch.
I think a lot of the Democratic base right now is going to expect them to all but lay their bodies on the line to stop the Senate rather than allow any nominee to go forward.
If he gets replaced by a hardline social conservative, the Democratic leadership will have hell to pay. They cannot let this happen.
It's time for Democrats to throw down. We need to play by street rules.
Play by street rules.
Do it.
All right,
I would love it.
Go on. Doesn't this look like a panel that's going to play by street rules? Come on, they're all buttoned down.
The one thing we know on the Supreme Court is that Democrats are going to do everything they can. They're going to play dirty. They're going to do everything they can to disparage the person. What the president needs to do is not overthink it. Don't overly play to the liberal women in the Republican conference. These Democrats who are running in these red seats, they're in a terrible position vis-a-vis the Supreme Court nominee if they listen to some of those wackos that we just heard in that tape. He just needs to pick a solid choice, and let's get it on.
Amy Coney Barrett, she has 9 children. She's also a federal appellate court judge, Ed. She's another person who they're looking at very carefully, another incredible record as a federal appellate court judge. Thoughts?
An outstanding professor at Notre Dame, a former law clerk to Justice Scalia. She's shown in her confirmation process last year. She was the victim of a lot of anti-religious, anti-Catholic bigotry.
She has
from
9
Democratic
children.
senators.
That's immediately suspect.
She goes to Mass.
Oh, she goes to Mass. Oh, terrible. I prayed the rosary today. I must be in real trouble.
Well, including 2 adopted kids.
Yeah.
She's an extraordinary person and has an extraordinary legal mind.
One other who I really like, Kevin Newsom from the 11th Circuit, Alabama guy. Scott, you know anything about Kevin? He was appointed by Trump in 2017. Another incredible, I mean, again, just so people understand, these are real people too. Credible personal story, cared for his disabled sister who recently passed away. Amazing man, kind of in the mold of CT, Justice Thomas. And I mean, this is an incredible list of people, but Newsom, I also think, is the kind of guy that Trump would like. They would personally get along really well.
Yeah,
I expect him to be in the Oval Office.
And he's a fellow state solicitor general, at least a former state solicitor general.
Okay, Scott,
so,
got it.
we appreciate the federalism aspect. We can get our state plugs in when we can.
By the way, and I think you'd be a good person to respond to this. This was another comment by Jeffrey Toobin today about what's at stake with this particular nomination. Let's watch.
Let's talk
facts. Let's talk about what America is going to be like that's different. You are going to see 20 states pass laws banning abortion outright. Right. Roe v. Wade is doomed. It is gone because Donald Trump won the election, and because he's going to have the chance, and because he's going to have the chance to appoint 2 Supreme Court justices.
Scott, that will be in your state, I imagine. Texas is one of the most pro-life states out there. Dan Patrick and, of course, the governor, Greg Abbott, very pro-life. They all say this is all about abortion.
Well, this is continued scaremongering. I mean, this all sounds like Senator Ted Kennedy's infamous speech about Robert Bork. And if this is the play that they're going to run, I agree. They're going to have a real hard time, because this list of nominees, or this list of potential nominees that the administration has put forward, have excellent credentials. And if they're going to really try to run the Bork play again, it's going to fail.
Matt, wouldn't this list be a list that Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio, let's say they got the nomination, all these guys would have been candidates for them too. And gals. I shouldn't say just guys, but
that could very well be. And I think the big question on abortion law is, you look at the pro-life sentiment in this country in 1988 or around the Webster time, and today, this country is more pro-life. If they want to pick the pro-life fight, we're going to win it.
How about the fact that it's not in the Constitution? It was totally made up. Other than that, even Larry Tribe, didn't Ruth Bader Ginsburg say something about that years ago? Yeah. Fantastic. I could spend the whole hour with you guys. Up next, Seen and Unseen, Raymond Arroyo. It's time now for our Seen and Unseen segment, where we expose what's behind the big cultural stories of the day. Oh, the late-night talk show hosts, for the first time, have banded together to roast President Trump. For more on what they're doing and why, we're joined by Fox News contributor, New York Times bestselling author of the Will Wilder series, Raymond Arroyo. Raymond, I saw the triple boxes with Conan and the others, and I was thoroughly not interested, but apparently everybody else is.
Well, this is important. Let me tell you how this started. Jimmy Fallon came out to the Hollywood Reporter and said he kind of backtracked and apologized for having Donald Trump on. He's been hazed for this for months during the campaign. They said it humanized the president. Then the president addressed it in South Carolina. Watch.
Jimmy Fallon. The guy screws up my hair. He apologized for humanizing me. The poor guy, because now he's going to lose all of us. If somebody would open a talk show at night, because the guy on CBS is what a lowlife. What a lowlife. I mean, honestly, are these people funny? There's no talent. They're not like talented people. Johnny Carson was talented.
Okay, well, first of all, you and I both agree.
We love Johnny Carson.
Trump would be a great late night host.
Oh,
he's
really
funny.
He's off the cuff. But I'm going to take a slightly different view here, the devil's advocate. I don't think the president should have elevated them by attacking them like this. Because it elevates them. Now, the late night industrial complex came together, and they created this, a trifecta of attack on the president. Watch.
Did you see Trump's rally last night?
Nope.
Me either. Heard he said some pretty bad stuff about us.
Really? That doesn't sound like him.
I heard he said we're all no talent, low life, lost souls.
Well, that's not right. That's Conan. Hold on, I'll get him.
Oh, hey guys, what's up? We're just talking about what President Trump said last night. President who?
Trump.
Donald Trump. The real estate guy who sells steaks. He's president? Yeah. Wow. How's he doing?
Not so good.
Hey, you still on for lunch?
Yeah. What do you want to eat?
Red hen?
Red hen.
Oh
you know what the problem with this is?
So unfunny.
It's not funny. There's no funny. And there's something else really sad here. We need, as Americans, a place that we can unify. And laughter, comedy was that place. Jimmy Fallon was the last holdout in late night that kept politics on a low simmer or the back burner. He had fun, he had games, he's silly, goofy. That's gone now. I have a friend who's watched him every night since he premiered. She just told me, I took him off of my DVR. And what's so crushing about this? He was that last bastion for people. And only a year ago, last year, he said this to his colleague, Willie Geist.
It's just not what I do. I think it'd be weird for me to start doing it now. I don't really even, care that much about politics. I got to be honest. I love pop culture more than I love politics. I'm just not that brain,
Do you ever feel pressure to talk about Donald Trump or to go political? Do you hear that noise?
No, I mean, I think the other guys are doing it very well. When it's organic, I'll dip into it as well. But I've always made jokes about the president.
Fallon was really smart there.
You bet.
Why cut your audience in half?
Right.
Why do that?
Well, here's the problem. I'll tell you why he's doing it now and doing these mea culpas. Colbert was beating him in the ratings, 3.8 million people tuning in. So I went and I dug up the man we heard about earlier, Johnny Carson, who talked to Barbara Walters about politics and why he stayed away from it in his show. Watch.
I think one of the dangers, if you are a comedian, which basically I am, if you start to take yourself too seriously and start to comment on social issues, your sense of humor suffers somewhere. The Tonight Show basically is to amuse people, to make them laugh.
This is why he presided over the most watched talk show of all time for more than 40 years.
No one will ever touch Carson because that era is over. Could they go a week without Trump?
I doubt
They should
it.
go on a Trump diet, not mention it for a week, and try to be funny.
Think about Carol Burnett, who was his contemporary. She also kept politics out of her show. She could have done Nixon sketches, never did. She was doing Mrs. Hugh Wiggins and Mama's Family, which 40 and 50 years later, people are still buying the DVDs.
And by the way,
of.
Tyler Perry, when he does our favorite,
Medea.
Medea stays away from. I love Medea. I love all Medea
because
movies.
everybody can laugh together around that. We need unifying comedy,
It's
not
awful.
divisive comedy.
All
And
right.
Carson's right. The humor suffers, and we don't need that anymore.
It's not. I'll just say the worst offense. It's not funny.
Yeah, well, that is a problem.
Conan's the most funny in that three
Yeah,
boxes. But Raymond Seinfeld is speaking about this week about the Roseanne reboot. So what is he saying?
Remember when I told you this show, when everybody was hailing it, oh, this is great, we all love it. And I said, she's a loose cannon, she's a little crazy. And ABC had to let her go. Now Seinfeld is saying, no, they shouldn't have done that. They should have recast the role of Roseanne Connors with another actress. And then he added this controversial.
I didn't see why it was necessary to fire her. Why would you murder someone who's committing suicide? But I never saw somebody end their entire career with one button push. That was fresh.
I think what he was saying there, with a little tongue-in-cheek, was that the audience should have decided what to do with Roseanne. Maybe give her another chance. I don't know. But, you know, Seinfeld has always been on kind of the outside of comedy. He hates the PC culture, and he doesn't speak on college campuses, won't entertain
he said
them.
that. He said
we have the bite, but I don't know if we have time.
Yeah, we have the. I want to
we
play
have
this
it?
again.
Okay,
It dovetails back to what Carson was saying about how you circumscribe unifying humor by getting really political. Let's watch.
Does the climate worry you now? I've talked to Chris Rock and Larry the Cable Guy. They don't even want to do college campuses anymore.
I hear that all the time. I don't play colleges, but I hear a lot of people tell me don't go near colleges. They're so PC. They just want to use these words. That's racist. That's sexist. That's prejudice. They don't even know what they're talking about.
He's old school in that. And what I love, Jerry Seinfeld is doing a new season of his Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. Jerry Lewis, in one of his last interviews, is in the car with Seinfeld. Cannot wait to see that. I promise you, it will not be PC, and it probably won't be political.
Jerry Lewis smashed Obama pretty hard in your interview.
But that was not in his comedy act. That was in an interview, and I asked him about refugees, and he said how he felt about it.
They're not funny when all it is Trump, 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 Trump. It's not funny. It's boring.
Well, they become a political activist, and nobody wants to see that. They want to laugh.
On the other networks that nobody watches. All right, Raymond, awesome. Thank you so much. And something special for you next. Two prominent Democrats give us the inside scoop on what's a simmering civil war in their own party. Stay there. The win last night by little-known Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez last night was a stunning upset over a member of the Democrats' House leadership team. Some are calling Ocasio the new torchbearer for the far left in the Democratic Party. And as we noted earlier, she supports the abolition of Immigration Customs Enforcement, otherwise known as ICE. So let's look at the party's future with a sitting Democratic congressman who also shares that view, Mark Pocan of Wisconsin. Congressman, first of all, I want to thank you for coming on the show. We invite a lot of your colleagues from the Democratic Party, and most of them say no. We really respect you for coming on tonight, so thanks so much.
Very glad to be here.
So your thoughts on the win last night?
Well, I think what we saw, not just that win, but other wins around the country. A lot of people are progressive, especially the Democratic primaries, but I would argue a lot of those issues resonate in competitive districts. So we actually did a poll for the Progressive Caucus, 30 competitive swing districts. With the issues that progressives supported, mirrored the issues that people in swing districts supported. So again, I think if you talk in an honest, authentic way, like Bernie Sanders did when he ran, I think you can do really well with voters.
This is what Ocasio-Cortez said when she was asked today about whether she'd support Nancy Pelosi as Speaker. Let's watch.
I think that ICE is right there as a part of it. It has its extrajudicial nature is baked in to the structure of the agency, and that is why they're able to get away with black sites at our border, with the separation of children.
So that was her talking about immigration and customs enforcement. You also agree with her that ICE should be abolished, correct?
Yeah, so I was down to the border a couple weeks ago, and just watching the buildup of how ICE has been misused from its original focus, I think, after 9/11. And I just think that it's impossible for ICE to still do its functions. If now when people see an ICE jacket, instead of being able to go into a community and get information to get someone who might be a bad figure, everyone's afraid and they run from it, you're not going to be able to accomplish the goals. So we think there are plenty of functions that have to continue to happen. You can put those back in other agencies, but the way ICE currently is operating, especially under President Trump, makes it impossible.
Again, they're operating that way because we have a fairly big crush from Central America, not as much from Mexico, but from Central America across the border. We've had, tens of thousands of people come over the last several months. I mean, you got to do something with them. And ICE is charged with figuring out why people are coming into the country. If you're not coming through a normal port of entry, they have to be dealt with. I mean, you wouldn't submit that they should just walk into the country and not be greeted by anybody, correct?
So here's one of the problems that I found. When I went to the Hidalgo Bridge, a legal point of entry where you can claim asylum, they're doing everything possible to make it almost impossible for someone to come there to claim asylum. So then you either go back into Mexico, where you can be kidnapped by a cartel and held hostage.
Why is Mexico not giving people asylum? They gave like 14,000 people asylum last year.
I don't work for the Mexican government, so I couldn't tell you. But what happens then, people either get forced to that risk of a cartel, or they come in illegally and then they wind up in the system. So really, part of our problem is how we're actually taking enforcement at those legal points of entry.
This is what she said, Ocasio-Cortez, about the Nancy Pelosi issue. I think we have it now. Let's watch.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Supporter. Apparently, we have trouble clearing it up. But she says she wouldn't support her. That's an interesting position your party is in. Look, the Republicans have gone through their own fits and starts, and they elected Donald Trump. They really hit leadership. John Boehner's out, Eric Cantor's out, Donald Trump's president. Are you going to see that in the Democrat Party? Is she, and more like you, more like the Bernie Sanders wing, is that the vibrant future where you can get blue-collar workers, maybe white working-class workers, to look toward the party?
Yeah, I think, again, what we're trying to do is if we peel on an economic message, I think the one thing that we can all agree on is Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump ran on actually a pretty similar message about the system being rigged against them, and it resonated. So I think what we've seen in some of these primaries around the country, when people talk about the fact that, unfortunately, in this town, the special interests have way too much sway, people really feel that. The drain the swamp was a brilliant line.
How did Wisconsin go for Trump?
Actually, because of trade. Donald Trump on the 30,000-foot level addressed it correctly. I think he's fumbled it completely since he's become president.
Getting all these jobs back, including in Wisconsin. We're bringing manufacturing jobs.
Harley-Davidson's going
Harley-Davidson had already,
well, that's one of the biggest
know,
employers in Wisconsin.
Well, I love Harley-Davidson, but they had already started to transition, to some extent, into bicycles. Now they're making bicycles because they couldn't figure out a way to market the big what they call them, the hogs. Are you a hog driver?
Yeah.
That to
Our
the young
governor
people.
is, though.
So they had a little trouble with that. But I don't think you should attack Harley-Davidson. All I'm saying is there's a lot of manufacturing coming back into the United States. We see a resurgence with steel, and you could say what you want about, oh, Trump fumbled it, but he's actually disrupting the old way, which had to be disrupted for Wisconsin, for Ohio, for Pennsylvania.
Seeing a lot of job loss through the. I'm not against targeted tariffs. Actually, I'm in the Democratic Party. I'm one of the people who said Donald Trump said the top line message
become
correctly.
A Republican. Forget the Democrat.
Well, the problem is, he doesn't have a philosophy around trade. He's just throwing out tariffs via tweet. And that makes a lot of Democrats and Republicans very nervous.
Have you spent any time with Bob Lighthizer, the U.S. Trade Rep?
I am tomorrow.
You are tomorrow?
Yeah, at 11:30.
One of the smartest people. I think you and he will have an interesting conversation.
I think he has a philosophy around trade. I'm not sure if the president does. He's
super smart.
I've heard that from many people.
Trump wants to bring manufacturing and strength back to key American sectors where other countries are cheating. The only way to do that is to shake up the system. He's doing that. That's his philosophy.
I think if he listens to Lighthizer more, he might be better off.
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah,
it's
of course.
Great. So was it that scary? I mean,
no, not at all.
Everyone probably wants me to beat you up more, but I mean, we can find some.
I look forward to my next invite.
All right. Thanks so much. And now let's get a take from Democratic pollster Doug Schoen. So, Doug, is the rise of the far left? I mean, come on, the congressman is very affable. I mean, he wants to abolish ICE, but I guess who doesn't today?
Well, I don't.
I know, I know you don't. But is this good for the party where you're embracing people or having people shouted down in public, and the Congressional Black Caucus is now mad at Chuck Schumer because Schumer criticized Maxine Waters? I mean, wild.
It is wild. And look, I'm a centrist. I believe there's about 40–50% of America who rejects the politics of the far right and the far left. And what you try to do in elections, at least what I try to do, is to build consensus, not try to take narrow ideological points and principles and impose them on the electorate. I believe in civility and compromise and of all things, decency. And this is just for a general election.
Doug, hold that thought. We're going to keep you for another block because we have so much to ask you. Stay right there. A lot more. Who's to blame for separations at the border? Oh, the recent border crisis may not be the winning issue the left hoped it would be. According to a new Rasmussen poll, most Americans do not blame President Trump for separating children from parents who cross the border illegally. The survey found that 54% of likely voters blame the parents. Who would have thunk it? Only 35% blame the federal government for actually enforcing the law. Here now, Hans von Spakovsky, senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, expert in this, and we welcome back Democratic pollster Doug Schoen. Doug, we have to finish this point. Hans has got to come in on this immigration issue, so key. But we have now President Trump at 47% in the new Harvard-Harris poll. That came out late today. The Democrats, I think, their heads are spinning. Yeah, is it 53%? 53%. It's 47%, excuse me. Yeah, 47%, and not bad. I guess it was 53% back in May, but 47%, given all the negative media coverage, separating families at the border, everyone blaming him for that in the media, that's not bad. So I'm not sure this immigration issue is going to be the gold that Democrats thought it would be.
Well, look, people don't like the images of families being separated, let's be clear. But what they want is comprehensive immigration reform, not the endless political battles. And to have the Democrats basically saying, get rid of ICE, or they're fascistic or whatever, rather than proposing concrete solutions like build the wall, secure the borders, and have a pathway to citizenship for the Dreamers, that's logical and rational and what swing voters want, not just this rhetoric and this extreme behavior that Democrats appear in some way to be encouraging, Laura.
Yeah, we have some video of what happened at ICE headquarters today. Let's watch. Blank your borders, basically, Hans. This has gotten wild.
Yeah, but this doesn't help the Democratic Party, because you talk to the American voters. Look, one of the reasons that Trump got elected was because American voters said, we finally want to see our immigration laws enforced. And this latest polling showing that common sense, they blame the illegal parents for bringing their kids across the border with them. I mean, that makes complete sense, and that shows you why I think that the Democrats with these protests, they're not actually doing themselves any favors.
Doug, the congressman we just had from Wisconsin, he seems quite reasonable. I mean, he's very nice, affable, but he wants to abolish ICE too. Yeah, and that becomes the mainstream of the Democratic Party. I mean, they do so much work, such important work for the country. Now they're being blamed for people coming into the country because if you have a child, you can never be deported. And now that's ICE's fault?
No, of course it isn't. And look, the congressman was indeed affable, very likable. But I'm not for Medicare for all. I'm not for a guaranteed job, guaranteed college. I'm for rational economic policies with a social safety net and securing the borders. What's so terrible about that?
Hans, final thoughts very quickly.
Well, the other thing that has come out that's hurt the left is that information finally comes out that this happened under prior presidents, Obama, Bush, and Clinton. In fact, Clinton is responsible for this.
They were all struggling with this. We need a real immigration enforcement bill. We'll be right back.
Great.